Hello and welcome to Interconnected, the podcast that explores the intricate links between life's most profound, weird and wonderful things. I'm Jake Robinson.
And I'm Robin Taylor.
And in each episode we discuss an interesting science topic and challenge ourselves to connect it with another subject that might seem completely unrelated, sometimes trivial or quirky.
Yeah, how quirky is this? Higgs boson and hedgehog spines. Or Mariana Trench and maple syrup.
Very quirky. So we hope you find the podcast thought-provoking and entertaining, and we invite you to explore the interconnectedness of life.
Great, so without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Okay, so before we jump into today's main science topic, it's time for Neck of the Woods. In this section, we each take 30 seconds to share what's happening in our part of the world. Robin lives in Fiji and I live in South Australia. So over to you, Robin. What's happening where you are?
I mean, we've got some really boring stuff, which is to do with budgets and blah, blah, blah. But I think what is really interesting for me, and it relates to what we were talking about before with regard to marijuana, is that there is an increased awareness now of drug usage and substance abuse, and somehow that's become like a hot topic here. And I think, as we were discussing before, it's something which is misguided only in that it's not that you shouldn't attend to drug problems, but rather that it just remains in the criminal proceedings. And one of the things that's maybe a little bit unusual, it's not just marijuana now here, which is locally consumed, but rather Fiji has been for about 15 years a bit of a crossroads or a interconnected hub for transit, for more alternative, drugs, which normally would cost a little bit more, but somehow that's now leaking out into the population, which weirdly, talk about interconnected, I've always felt is a sign of our increasing prosperity. So Fiji's relative lack of prosperity meant that it wasn't a viable market. So talk about economics and human behavior and how that works. We actually get prosperous and that brings in a new problem.
Interesting. So you guys drink a lot of that Carver stuff, don't you? So do you export that? Does that help your economy?
That is exported. Yep, it has been exported, and there has been some real concerns about how it could actually damage your liver as well. Yeah. But it's an alternative to Valium. So it's a sedative. And again, I think it started off, I don't know where we are in the world now at the moment, but I know that there was a German company that was trying to make it into a viable product. And I'm not sure whether they're still continuing but I also have that very, very dumb suspicion that when you look at the actual analysis of what was done to show that there was a liver concern, having too much Carver or using this Carver pills or Carver supplements or whatever it is, that I have a feeling that it probably is being inflated. And I suspect that the makers of people like Valium, I'm not saying it's them specifically, but people like that might have an interest in making sure that Carver doesn't become an alternative. Yeah.
Interesting.
And you?
So, not loads of amazing news, but Julian Assange has returned back to...
Oh, that's right, yes.
He landed in Canberra, didn't he?
Is he considered to be, like in Australia, a hero or
Well,
positive?
I think it's mixed, yeah. So I think when it all first happened, like there's news stories that, they kind of turned their back on him, but because he spent so much time in prison and these different embassies, then he's become kind of a martyr. He has got a massive following. So he founded WikiLeaks in like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And they obviously gained attention around 2010 for leaking a load of top secret documents relating to things like the Iraq War.
Yeah, that was Edward Snowden's stuff, wasn't it? That he was releasing all that through WikiLeaks.
Yeah, as well, yeah. Yeah, was it through WikiLeaks? All right, yeah.
I believe it was, yeah.
Yeah, there was someone else called Chelsea Manning who I think...
That's right, yes.
I think she was working for the military and she probably passed some information on to Julian
Was
as
that
well.
the one?
Like, there were videos of, murders.
Yeah, demeaning
definitely
stuff.
Shouldn't have been happening.
Garbage, really. Yeah.
So he spent probably 15 years or something in embassies and prison. He was in Belmarsh prison for the last 4 years, which is one of the UK's high security prisons. So I basically think he was forced to confess.
Sign a deal, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was forced to plead guilty, but they said, you've spent enough time already, so he's now home. Anyway. All right, so let's get on with the show.
Okay. Basically, today's main topic is to do with bats, as in the flying ones, not the ones we use to hit people with. And why do they get a bad press? So bats tend to have a bad press around the world, and that's causing significant potential harm. So I believe about half the species of bat are now have concerns about their longevity as a species.
Yeah.
So Jake, can you lead us through in a nutshell, why do we think that
Yeah.
bats have a bad
It might be a
press?
long nutshell. So, in some cultures, bats have historically had a bad reputation due to superstitions and myths and folklore, associating them with darkness and death and evil spirits, these kind of things. So, these negative perceptions have been perpetuated through literature and art and media over the centuries, contributing to their misunderstood reputation. I did Google something about how many horror movies contain bats, and it's incredible, really. I think it's been reinforced through Hollywood for sure. In addition to this, they have nocturnal habits and cryptic behaviors that have fueled fears and misconceptions among many people. A recent study revealed that people's fear of bats can stem from their resemblance to rodents, often perceived as pests, and the portrayal of vampire-like behaviors in movies, which often presents distorted and misleading information. Oh, there's this funny thing. Did you watch Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom? I'm sure you have.
Yes.
So, yeah, I watched it as a child. Well, there's one scene where Jones and his kind of nightclub singer companion, her name's Willie Scott, they're riding through a forest in India on elephants when a colony of flying foxes flies over. These are large fruit bats. And Willie says, "Wow, what big birds." But suddenly the theatrical music took a sinister turn, and Jones replied with an equally sinister voice, "Those aren't big birds, sweetheart. They're giant vampire bats." And it's just that kind of thing that reinforces the message, like the fruit bats and the wonderful things that contribute to pollination and seed dispersal, all these kind of things. But for a start, there are no giant vampire bats, certainly not in India. And secondly, these visual, auditory, and dialogical cues, they only strengthen the perception of bats as fiendish creatures, don't they? So many millions of people watch these kind of movies, and they have a major part in shaping people's perceptions of animals, for better or worse. Go onto YouTube, there's a video called Bats Evolution in Cinema, Scary Bats in 60 Movies by Size. And it shows how bats, particularly in horror movies, are invariably portrayed in an evil light. So I think this has a lot to do with sealing their bad reputation, for sure. We can talk about disease as well. So some diseases are associated with bats as being the vectors. But I think a lot of it's historical, these kind of fiendish characterizations of them. There's also Vlad the Impaler as well, so where Dracula came from. I'm not sure why he was associated with bats, but I think that kind of sealed the deal in those times.
Well, yeah, I think that when you chose the topic and I started looking around to it,
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking, you know what? It's actually quite a recent phenomena that people have thought about bats as being, and it almost feels a bit like we can all blame Mary Shelley for starting off the horror genre in the Western world with Frankenstein, and then we get Bram Stoker doing, Dracula.
Yeah.
And because he's a blood drinker, somehow, at that point, we then started to hear about animals that actually did drink blood, and that's why they're called vampire bats.
Yeah.
But they did not suck anyone dry. But somehow just that association meant that somehow Hollywood did pick that up.
I think so. And then just combined with their kind of nocturnal lifestyles and their kind of mysterious behaviors, where they live in caves, this kind of stuff, I think altogether. But I reckon it is a cultural thing, because there are some cultures where, for instance, in Asia, they're a sign of good sex, good fortune, good death. So they're actually revered in some cultures. So I think it is.
So is that one of those things? I mean, what I can't find is if there's any association with a bad reputation, let's say, particularly in prior to Hollywood, or especially, let's say, in Western cultures. Like, in other words, is it the case? I mean, as an example, let's say from where you and I originally come from, badgers tend to have a reputation that is not as negative as bats, but they live in dark, mysterious places, and they're usually out of sight, and we don't really, as are moles. They're things that, sure, they cause an inconvenience, but we wouldn't have the same negative connotations that bats seem to have. So I think it really does come down to it's the media and literature, and in particular, having a Hollywood movie thing where you can have, Dracula transform into his superpower of becoming a bat, so he can fly anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, I was thinking, are there any movies that portray bats in a nice light? But then, there's obviously Batman and Robin.
Well, you see, this is why I've always been interested in bats myself, because
of Batman.
Because of my name.
The other side of the Hollywood coin.
Yeah, and I always thought of myself as Batman, and as time has gone on, I've realized I'm more the Robin. And I mean, the counterpart to the Adam West Batman, as in the, holy whatever it is that's going on there. Yeah, holy the comedic mackerel. Relief rather than the serious crime film.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, Hollywood might have had a positive effect on people's perspective of bats.
I just want to...
I reckon in general not.
This is where I kind of feel. Sorry, I want to stay a little bit on the comic culture here. So for me, this is the one part of the Batman ethos that I've never understood.
Yeah.
So Bruce Wayne falls into a cave, and then it's a bat cave, and that somehow triggers him to think that if he wants to strike fear into people, it's going to be a bat, and that's how he becomes Batman. And I'm thinking like,
all right.
huh?
So actually originated from that nefarious perspective that we're talking about.
But again, I mean, they're small.
Yeah.
No one's been, whacked or hit or whatever it is. I mean, honestly, it'd be better to be Giraffe Man. I mean, they do much more worse. I mean, it's just really bizarre.
Yeah.
The way the whole ethos is of all the things to do. I mean, you could think of equally crazy things, but somehow it's taken on board. And here we are. Bats are bad players. Yeah.
So I think that study, they did some nice qualitative research study that linked people's perception of bats to Hollywood movies and their portrayal as these kind of vampirish, blood-sucking, disease-spreading fiends. I mean, we obviously need to change that because it's wrong. So let's just list off a few things that bats contribute to. They control insect populations. They can eat up to 1,000 insects per hour. Some bats can. That's insane, isn't it? Yeah, I remember doing bat surveys back in the day in the UK and people saying they can eat 3,000 midges or mosquitoes every night, just one single bat. So they obviously play important roles in keeping so-called pests at bay. They pollinate plants. So they're essential for 300 different fruit species.
Including things like mangoes for us.
Yeah, exactly. So and you mentioned something last week, the agave plant. So there's tequila as well. They disperse seeds, so they actually aid in regenerating up to 95% of tropical forests, which obviously itself has all these interconnected cascading effects. So if you can restore forests, then it has climate regulation implications, biodiversity implications. And so they contribute to that. So they enhance biodiversity. They support something like 20 plus so-called ecosystem services. So these are the things in nature that benefit us, humans. There's an interesting one, actually. They provide guano fertilizer. So many countries, I don't know what it's like in Fiji, but many countries, it's actually valued at something like $1 billion annually, actually harvesting the guano for bats and using it as a fertilizer for crops.
I mean, I've seen videos of people doing that. That tends to be more the bat, the bats that are living in caves, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And
exactly.
I seem to remember, people die from trying to do this because the fumes coming off from it are so bad.
Right. Yeah,
so they actually have to kind of do some pretty serious
hazmat suit style.
Yeah, well, not quite, but they certainly have to have things to breathe and
that makes sense.
They have had
yes.
So either filters or whatever, but yeah,
a lot of ammonia coming off it. Yeah, that's interesting. So that will probably be the fruit bats because the micro bats. So there's two kinds of bats: these kind of macro chiroptera, and then the micro bats. They don't really excrete guano per se. It's more like these tiny little droppings. The guano harvesting is probably from fruit bats.
Except most fruit bats aren't really cave dwellers, are they?
Yeah, a lot of them are, yeah.
Are they? Oh.
Yeah, and a lot of them hang in trees, though, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely got a garden full of bats that are fighting every night.
Yeah.
They got this kind of shrill kind of argument that's going on all the time. And
yeah, exactly. So through their guano and their droppings, etc., they contribute to nutrient cycling. So it's rich in nitrogen and phosphorus. As we mentioned, they aid in food production and drink production. So you've mentioned mango and agave. They support traditional medicines as well. So a lot of bats and their products are used in remedies across various cultures. They contribute to lots of things, so they really shouldn't be getting the press that they are getting.
Tell me a little bit more about, you were saying to me the other week that interesting fact of just how diverse the actual species are in terms of,
that's right. So something like 1/5 of all mammals are bats, which is mind-blowing, isn't it? Yeah. And
I think what you mean though is 1/5 this is by species, isn't it?
By species, 1/5 of all mammal species is a bat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think they're the second most abundant mammal after rodents.
Okay. All right.
Mind-blowing numbers there.
But there again, about half of them now are under threat. Huh?
Yeah, many of them under threat. So in the UK, there's 17 species, I think, or between 16 and 18 species. And I think they're all protected just because their numbers have plummeted. But a lot of them actually specialize on roosting in trees. And so obviously there's something like 10% of forest cover left in the UK. It
Yeah, we
kind of
don't
just
clear caves, we clear trees.
exactly, yeah. So many of them rely on trees to roost and to forage
Mm.
and commute, etc. If we wipe the forest off the surface, then obviously it's going to follow that the bats are going to become threatened. So
One of the things that seems to be happening is they've got something called white nose.
white
Or
nose syndrome, yes, I've
yeah.
just been writing about that. Yeah, so there's a
So what
disease
is
in
that?
America. So
Right.
it's a fungal disease that affects bats in America,
Ah,
but they think it actually evolved in Europe and Asia. But because it co-evolved with bats in this continent, in Europe and
right.
Asia, then they kind of evolved a resistance to it. So it does
Okay.
cause kind of milder symptoms in bats, but we can
Wait, in
personify them
vampires?
if you want. Yes, in vampires, in Draculas across Europe. No, so yeah, it does cause minor symptoms. Yeah, so bats in Europe, they co-evolve with this fungus, so they only get kind of mild-ish, relatively mild, so probably does
Ah,
affect some of them. Like the common cold over here, it could cause damage, or the flu over here, it could cause damage. Potentially could lead to a few deaths. So over
yeah.
in America, they think it might have been transported into caves by cavers. So the spores
Oh.
can just live on cave equipment or
Ah.
cave clothing. And so they found it was around 2000-ish, 2006 maybe. Yeah, I think it's 2006. They found the first case in a cave near New York, upstate New York. And
Wow.
since then, it's just literally, you should see the maps. It's just spread straight
Yikes.
across America like wildfire,
Wow.
killing off millions and millions of bats. And the bats haven't co-evolved with the fungus in
Yeah.
America.
So
It
we're doing
wakes
the
them up.
same in bats as humans we did with humans, where Europeans went across and
It's
donated and
exactly the same
gifted
thing as
measles. Yeah.
human. Yeah, exactly.
To try and wipe
Yeah,
out
it's the
indigenous
exact
populations.
same concept. So the bats,
Do you
I
think
think
that,
something like 50 million bats or tens of million bats are just dying across America.
man?
And there's,
I mean, I would never have. Is this? Have you just given away your big interlink here? Just
no,
this
no, I
idea
haven't. No.
about spelunkers causing, because
No.
that's cave. So have they adapted their behavior now? Is there
There's some
something?
kind of evolution going on, I think, but it's just
No,
so.
sorry. What I meant
Oh,
was
oh, the cavers, you mean?
the cavers.
Evan.
Yeah.
So a lot of the caves in America now, they have bans on activity in them, and I think they could probably go further for sure. But so it's spread into Canada as well, probably through
Wow.
caving activities. So it actually just wakes them up from. It just causes like these lesions in their skin, in their wings, and around their nose, and it wakes them up from hibernation or torpor.
Yes, sir.
And that's the thing that kills them, because they have to store enough brown fat in order to allow them to survive the winter. So if they're constantly waking up, it's using this brown fat energy reserve, and then they just don't have enough to eventually wake up again.
I mean, I think we should basically put a movement in that all cave spelunking associations and things should basically donate heaters
Yeah. They don't need to
to
hibernate.
caves. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
From
Yeah. So
solar
the
power.
fungus actually, its optimal temperature of surviving is like 3 to 5 degrees Celsius in caves, so really cool, damp environments.
Wow.
Pretty sad, really. So millions and
Yeah.
millions of bats are dying. There seems to be some evolution going on, but not fast enough. And they are developing vaccines as well. So there's been, I think, minimal amount of success with vaccines, but they're
Right.
constantly working on it, hoping that will help the bats survive into the future. But
Yeah.
there's an interesting case study, actually. So researchers were looking at samples in museums in America
Mm.
to see if they could basically swab the skin of these bats that have been stored, 100 years ago, just to see if there are any signs of the fungus in the bats. And they found one bat that actually had the white nose syndrome fungus on it, and it was brought over from France in something like 1908.
Wow.
So that was the earliest case they have, but it was actually originated from France. I think they were trying to just rule out that whether it had been present in America before 2006 or not, but they pretty much have done that now. But yeah.
So basically, if it's not the cavers, then it's the French who gave us democracy and white nose syndrome.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? I think it's one of the things, I mean, I know you mentioned it to do with the disease aspect of it, especially now we're in a post-COVID stage and, we've got this Wuhan lab issue and blah, blah, blah. And so bats are intimately involved in that. And I'm not sure what your take on all of that as a political commentary is, but just explain us to a little bit how, why bats have got this association with disease in terms of carrying so many viruses.
Yeah, so they do carry various viruses that can spill over into humans. Spillover refers to a pathogen that jumps the species barrier from one species into another, and that can occur in humans, and it's been increasing in recent decades, mostly due to things like habitat encroachment, and so we're actually moving into these wilder, I suppose, kind of habitats that would harbor these diseases naturally. So they've been circulating for thousands of years, but we're chopping down forests again. It all goes down to this kind of habitat destruction, but we're also causing the bat stress. I think we mentioned this before. As we're doing this, we're causing the bat stress, which is called allostatic load. And the more stress we cause bats, the more viruses they shed. So the more likely it's to reach humans and jump the species barrier.
When you say that they shed viruses, explain to us how that works. What's
So they literally increase the shedding of the virus particles into the environment. So the immune system essentially is weakened in the bats, and the immune system of the bats not dealing with the virus particles. The virus particles are able to proliferate, and they're just emitted into the environment, increasing the likelihood that they will reach humans. It's a combination of factors. It's this habitat destruction. We're causing stress through urbanization, pollution, noise, blah, 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 which increases the likelihood of a spillover event. We can do something about it. It's not like, oh, we're scratching our heads wondering why these spillover events are increasing. We know why it is, but we've got to have the political will to be able to restore ecosystems and reduce stress in wildlife, I suppose.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where, true to our theme of being interconnected, it just strikes me as being very bizarre that from what I'm looking at and the commentaries that I'm reading, COVID was a huge shock to the world. Of course, there are lots of conspiracy theories about, you know, how it started, what the reactions of the governments were, you know, was it overblown, was it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But just in terms of there being a pandemic, have we learned how to deal with it? And the answer seems to be a resounding no. We haven't learned anything from this for some of the reasons that you're talking about, that we haven't decreased the opportunities for spillovers to occur. So I know that people will say, oh, but it's not the spillover, it's the lab and they've done gain of function and blah, 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 blah. But to me, it's, well, why not just knock this one out of the park so that it doesn't, you know, and so
we can put strategies in place. We just don't want to take the holistic approach. It's like we always need simple solutions, don't we? Rather than thinking about it.
So this is the bit where surely this should have taught us. I mean, even if we were ignorant now,
but it just shows you how we bounce back to a kind of norm. It's that hedonistic treadmill. When things go good or bad, we always bounce back to this baseline level. It seems to have happened in COVID, like something bad's really happened, but then we've just kind of come back. We've bounced back to normal. It's this human adaptation, and we're kind of sticking our heads in the sand a little bit because of that.
Especially when, let's say, you know, when people do count the economic costs and stuff like that of what happened through COVID, it doesn't matter what people's, doesn't matter where the origin is, and it doesn't matter how people reacted. That is the reality, that we had that economic cost. Yes. So why aren't we kind of going, okay, but we have learned from,
The mind boggles. I think probably next time some countries at least will be more prepared in terms of rolling out, you know, PPE and potentially vaccines and that kind of stuff. But we should be thinking of that. But I mean, we should also be thinking of how the heck do we prevent these things from happening?
Yeah, prevention is better than cure, I think, is a saying that can't be emphasized enough, or a stitch in time saves 9. But just to come back to the preservation of bats and bat colonies and all that, I mean, one of the things that surely, I mean, again, you can help us out here a little bit as non-microbiologists, but surely we should be protecting bat species, particularly because they carry a high viral load when they're not stressed. So that means that they've got immune systems that are somehow figuring it out. Shouldn't we be massively interested in bats to kind of go, what are they doing in their immune system that helps us to...
Yeah, it's an adaptation to their high energy expenditure. You know, they're flying around all the time, so they have to have some kind of evolutionary adaptation to the increased likelihood of picking up viruses and pathogens.
But it means that they've
it's
already
an immune
evolved.
System adaptation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that we should be interested in for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Last thing I wanted to say about bats, which I hadn't thought about before. Well, there's many things. I hadn't really appreciated that. The one thing that's a bit unusual is that the bats, of course, have a counterpart in the other chordates, which is birds, but it's the only sort of flying vertebrate that other than birds.
Yep.
But they don't seem to fly the same way as birds. They seem to fly, when you're looking at the anatomy of a bat, they actually tend to have very elongated fingers. And the majority of their flapping is from the fingers.
Yeah, okay.
So that if you look at slow motion pictures of
that's
them
right. That's
flying,
right.
It's actually the fingers that are doing the work, not the...
Yeah, they are like hands basically, aren't they? But I think they call it homologous.
And I believe that there's what I'm trying to say about that, is that I didn't realize that there is, in fact, some sort of Brazilian species of bat that is one of the fastest flying animals in a straight line, which even beats the peregrine falcon.
Oh, wow.
So it goes so fast, it can actually go faster than a peregrine falcon going straight. Peregrine falcons, of course, go really fast because they
drop
when
down.
They're diving. Yeah,
exactly.
And they can
that's
pump
interesting.
their way
I didn't
down.
know that.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so the kind of order or the whatever taxonomic classification is, they're called chiropterans, and chiro is the Latin for hand. So you just mentioned the hand-like features in the wings. So chiro means hand, and pteron means winged. So you can think of pterodactyl or whatever. It basically means hand in wing.
Nice. Okay. Well, Jake, we're getting to the point where we're trying to look for a link through to our interconnected stuff, and we've already mentioned a couple just in our back and forth, but do you have some weird and wacky or quirky
Yes,
link?
I'll try. So the topic is bats getting bad press, and my link is bats getting bad press can increase oxidative stress in some humans.
Okay. Before we start,
tell
me what oxidative stress means.
It'll probably be better if I just carry on, actually, because
go for it.
Hopefully it will be explained in my link. Okay, so there are some night-blooming trees in the world, such as baobab trees in Africa, fig trees in Australia, durian trees in Asia. They actually have flowers called chiropterophilous flowers. And if you think back again to the wording, so chiroptera means hand in wing, so it refers to the bats, and phyllis means loving or attracting. So actually they have flowers that have evolved specifically to attract bats. And we've mentioned this before, that bats are really important in pollinating and seed dispersal of many trees across the world and fruits. But I'm going to use the durian as an example. So durian is a large fruit from Asia. You may have had it. I think there are various varieties. And it's well known for being a really smelly, stinky kind of, it smells a bit like, well, a lot of people say rotten flesh. But it tastes amazing. A lot of people think it tastes amazing anyway. So it's got amazing taste, but a disgusting smell. Anyway, so the fruit is a core part of some people's diets across Asia. And durian is known to contain high levels of antioxidants, so you might be able to see where this is going. Antioxidants actually keep free radicals at bay. Basically, free radicals can increase if you don't have antioxidants, and free radicals are these highly reactive molecules with unpaired electrons, and they essentially steal electrons from other molecules, causing cellular damage. And this is essentially what oxidative stress is. So when free radicals accumulate in cells, they can cause this oxidative stress, and it damages proteins and lipids and DNA. So all the things that our body's cells need to function. Yeah, and so this damage can impair cell and function and lead to cell death as well. So, to summarize, my actual link is if bats continue to get bad press, they're less likely to be protected, which means their populations will continue to decline, which puts the pollination of plants like baobab, figs, and durian at risk, which can increase oxidative stress in some humans via a lack of antioxidants in their diet. Bit tenuous, maybe, but that's my link.
Well, I think it deserves, a high 8. Like 8 point
nice.
something, like close to 9. But cool. I'm going to give you 5. I'm going to give you a low 8.
Explain.
Because I think that we should have, because you confused me with those technical words right at the beginning. So it's taken me a while to kind of catch up. But yeah, no, it's a good link.
But you got it in my summary though, right?
Yeah.
Nice. So there's one study in the journal Ecology and Evolution that found that there may be no durians at all without bats.
Wow.
They're a big threatened group of species, and yeah, especially the fruit bats, the big fruit bats.
With free radicals, that's of a lot of interest for aging research, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Looking at physiology and
this oxidative stress. Yeah, so it damages the cells. So this could be any cells in the body. Speeds up the aging process for sure.
Okay.
And they basically just steal electrons from other molecules, causing the damage to them.
There should have been a link beforehand to something to what people are doing to decrease the bat population. So I don't know what it is, And then you lead on to the...
Yeah, just in general, bats getting bad press, so they don't get... that's a good point. Maybe I missed something important out there. But bats get bad press, so therefore they don't get much conservation, attention, and resources.
Well, again, that,
or even restoring their habitats. The
fact that a cave or anyone who does any kind of outdoor activity, you don't normally think about putting all your outdoor clothes that are pretty mucky, and they're quite substantial, they're quite large, into an autoclave, do you?
Exactly.
Where you basically are killing off all the bacteria. And if you're saying, well, I want to go, to different parts of the world, and that's my idea of fun and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe that's kind of where, I'm not saying they're responsible for those particular fruit bats that are there, but in general, it's that mindset, isn't it?
True.
That people aren't thinking.
A lot of these people like spending time outdoors. You would think they're quite nature centric, and
but again, if they don't know the link,
and they don't know the link, exactly. If they're not,
and
sure,
also they might not be. Going back to the idea about it would be one thing to talk about cute, cuddly koalas being burnt in wildfire forests, so everyone can get straight onto that straight away. But bats,
Yeah. cryptic creatures. They're in the night. It's
Yeah.
it's almost like things you can't see, you don't care about as much.
Right.
And that's obviously what draws me to the microbial world a lot, because you literally can't see them. Probably the same thing applies to bats. They're a bit out of sight, out of mind, aren't they? Hidden in caves and trees in the night. We don't come out at night very often.
So just to be clear, your interest in this is because the things that can't be seen, and mine is because I'm just fascinated by pop culture and heroes, as in Batman and Robin.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
All right. Okay.
Nice.
Jake.
Just as a side note, have you tried durian, the fruit, before?
No, I can't. And I haven't seen it here.
Yeah,
I don't know
it's
what
a large
it is.
fruit. Yeah, so due to its overpowering smell, so I mentioned it smells like rotten flesh or whatever. It's actually been banned, and so there's actually like laws that ban you from having durian in certain public places and public transport across Thailand, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc.
So, what I can imagine. Hey, that would be a different link for a different topic as well.
Yeah,
to put durian in there somewhere. As in, is there a chance that you could have, if it tastes like rotting flesh?
It smells like rotting flesh. Tastes amazing.
Sorry. Smells like rotting flesh. Does that mean that people might be less aware of looking for things that smell like rotting flesh, and then you kind of go, oh, it's probably durian? Whereas it could actually be a body that's decomposing and therefore causing, diseases and bacteria and stuff like that. I don't mean human body. It could be, unless you're referring to human body. Does it smell like human bodies?
I'm not sure.
Decomposing.
Rotten flesh of some
variety.
I
don't know what decomposing human bodies smell like.
I've read a combination of rotten eggs, turpentine, terps, and something else, something about rotten onions or something. Anyway, so not a very nice smell, but it does taste nice. I've actually had durian ice cream before, and it was nice. But yeah, it did smell a little.
And does it still smell bad, even as the ice cream? It
wasn't quite whiffy, yeah. Ooh. So it's kind of a strange thing to do, smell something, because obviously olfactory plays a role in taste as well. And how
but isn't that weird, the way, like, since the olfactory does play a taste, and yet people love the taste?
Yeah, I guess you got to put a peg on your nose as you're eating it.
No, but that takes out 4/5 of your taste, isn't it? Yeah,
quite a bit. Yeah, interesting.
Weird.
Okay, so news from the invisible world. So much like humans, we talk about.
Sorry, I'm going to come in with my obscure messaging thing.
Oh yeah, teletext, whatever you say.
Hey Jake, anything coming down the telegraph pole for news from the invisible world?
Well, since you mention it, I guess I should say something. So there's a story here in the New Scientist that trees in our cities are dying. A sick microbiome might be to blame. So we've spoken a lot before about the human microbiome and how it's important. So these microbial communities, bacteria, fungi, viruses, etc., that live as essentially as an ecosystem in our bodies, and they provide various chemicals and important metabolites to keep us alive. But they do the same thing for other organisms as well. So it's not all about humans. So for trees, for instance, let's have a look at what this story says. Oh no, it's a New Scientist article. So you get halfway down there, it says, to continue reading, subscribe. Anyway. So trees have their microbiome too. So they're also known as holobionts, like humans. So basically they're a host plus trillions of microbes that form a functioning ecological unit. And I think the story, it's a New Scientist story. So I've actually got halfway down and it says, you must subscribe to continue reading. But I guess what it's going to say is that things like pollution and urbanization is affecting the microbiome of trees, which then has some kind of negative effect on their health. And something like 30 or 40% of trees that are planted in urban environments, they die within the first 5 years of being planted. And we've got to kind of get rid of this short-term thinking. We've got to, think about protecting trees, and that means understanding their microbiome as well, their microbial communities. Because if you think about it, if we're just continuously planting trees and they grow to 5 years, and then all we go is, it doesn't matter if they die, we'll just plant another one. Is this going to be this continuous cycle of these tiny trees in urban ecosystems? And what good is that to biodiversity or so-called ecosystem services? So I think an important part of this longer term thinking and caring for trees that we plant is things like ameliorating pollution and understanding what other factors that occur that are important for tree health. And probably these tiny little microbes that live in and around them, on their leaves, in their woody material, in the soil around their roots, etc., they probably play an important part in their health. So we should be viewing trees as these kind of complex systems in their own right and looking after them.
The microbes that live within trees and plants,
yes,
they obviously don't have a digestive system like we do, so that's where the majority of our microbes live, as you've explained to us before. So it's not sort of internal so much, it's more external.
Yeah, internal as well. Yeah. So there's what's called the endosphere. So this means the internal world, literally.
Right.
So there are many different microbes internally, and then there's the ecto, which is the outside part. So
Right.
we have what's called the phyllosphere or the phylloplane, and the phyllosphere is basically the above ground part of the plant, and there's millions of microbes living all over the plant leaves, and they play important roles in the plant's immune system. Some of them come and land, and they are pathogens as well. So you need the resident microbes to join together and try and kick these pathogens out. But you have distinct microbial communities that live inside the leaves and inside the stem and inside the roots as well. And also just these kind of very diverse microbial communities that live around the root area on the outside,
Right.
but they are very in close
Okay.
association with the plants as well. And that's called the rhizosphere.
Right. I mean, you're making me really think here, because I'm thinking, I do remember around about the mid-70s,
Yeah.
Dutch elm disease was suddenly a big thing in the UK, where we just lost most of our trees from there. I mean, it's like, I don't know what it was, but it seemed like it was more than 50% were going
I think it was
towards
like
that.
80%. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. And that again, we do tend to think of the microbial community as just being a disease, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
It's not thinking again as we're sort of, but what I'm trying to say is I've never thought about there having to be biodiversity in a microbial sense specifically for plants, even though
yes, exactly.
I'm involved in,
that's the important point that you're making. Yeah. So we do get these fleeting pathogens that might land and try and be opportunistic, steal the plant or the tree's resources, and then eventually it can cause death if it overtakes the plant's immune system.
Right.
But it's important to have this diverse community already in place that lives in and on the plant in a mutualistic way in order to prevent disease as well. So I guess this story is saying, we're not spending enough time trying to understand trees, particularly in this story in urban environments. We're probably, hammering them with a barrage of stressors like pollution, noise, light, chemicals, etc. And it's probably killing off the so-called good microbes that live in the trees, which is affecting
one
their
of the
health.
places I think that would be a good indicator of what's happening with the microbial species is, as we've mentioned before, looking at lichens.
Yeah.
Because again, the biodiversity of the lichens on the trees. So lichens tend to be sensitive to air pollutants quite a bit. So
yeah, that's true.
That's almost like the canary in the coal mine straight away. And then, of course, they're made up, half of their symbiotic relationship is as another microbe. So that's also, indicative of it. And again, you can kind of tell pretty much the health of a forest if you go in just by the biodiversity and the richness of a lichen community on that, which again would be an indicator of the health.
Yeah, good point. And we've mentioned before that lichens have a kind of nested symbiosis, so they have a core microbiome as well as all the visible stuff going on. So lichens are a good indicator for sure, and definitely sensitive to pollution. Yeah, so I think it's worth just trying to understand the tree a bit more and not seeing it as this kind of isolated entity. It's actually a community in itself, and we need to understand
that's a really
partners.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, food for thought. Thought. Okay.
Cool. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up today's show?
No, I'm pretty excited about whatever our next topic is going to be.
What is it? It's your choice, I think.
It's my choice. Don't know. Sorry, I'll have to come back to that.
Let me know.
I'll figure something out.
Alrighty. Okay, so again, we're excited to present the next show of Interconnected to you in a couple of weeks' time. And thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. Ciao.